So, good day, everyone. It is, in fact, a beautiful day here in Santa Barbara. I don't know why I keep saying it. It's always true, and I hope if you're not here already, you'll be back in Santa Barbara soon. And I have a feeling as we're getting near the end of this term that, well, certainly not for next term, but the next regular term after the summer and the fall, we'll probably all be back here, which would be absolutely terrific. So, today, Peter Kalmus and Tomorrow, the films. If you haven't seen Tomorrow as well, you might want to watch it, especially after hearing what you're about to hear. So, so far it seems to me there have been kind of two problems with the way that we've advocated for change, especially personal change. And the one is that it tends to be discrete individual solutions like cutting beef out of your diet or something, which is great, and we can all do that, but it's not sufficient. The problem is that the average American right now has a carbon footprint, as I mentioned before, that's 10 times bigger than it needs to be. It's the wrong way of putting it, than it has to be. In other words, if we are going to hold, the rise of atmospheric temperature to 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius, and I think 2 degrees is realistic now. We're just not going to be able to hit 1.5. But if we're going to hold it at 2 degrees Celsius, how are we going to do that? What does the, carbon footprint, climate footprint for each, planetary citizen have to be? We now know it's right about 2 metric tons of CO2 or equivalent gases per year. And unfortunately, the average American is emitting somewhere around 16 to 20 tons. And it all depends on who you are and where you live, in fact. So obviously there are I don't know how you'd put it, super emitters, people who live lavish lifestyles and all, who are emitting a lot more. But even, average people living, say, in Alaska, the average climate footprint is twice as big as the United States on average. So it's like 40 metric tons if you're a citizen of Alaska rather than a citizen of the lower 48 states. And it's all about energy to heat and all there. So it's a bigger challenge than just these one or two little things that we've seen along the way. I mean, they're all important, and that's why I, have drawn attention to things like, say, owning a car, because that's a quarter of the average carbon footprint for the, average American. That's like, 5 metric tons. It's a really big thing. You might not have liked hearing that message or the one about flying, but if you're actually looking at the pie, what the slices are like, those are big ones. The other problem, though, with what we've seen, and Thoreau would be an example, if you do take on the whole thing, try to change everything, it doesn't seem very appealing, at least the way it's described in Walden. And don't get me wrong, I think Walden's important, and Thoreau's sort of spiritual journey, at that time important as well. But he describes it as a very Spartan lifestyle, and he's, living alone without a family, and, conditions are pretty darn primitive for Thoreau. How exactly does that translate into the 21st century? I mean, we can't all go live out in the semi-wilderness, and we shouldn't, because there's not that much semi-wilderness left. But how do you do it? That's why the two films this week I think are good, because they show that people can and are doing it. Though Peter Kalmus is the first example. He has literally done what we all need to do, which is to reduce our climate footprint by a factor of 10. As incredibly difficult and, it just, incredibly, it's just almost too much to think about. How would you do that? It would involve changing the American way of life, and, it's just impossible. Well, but here's an example of the fact that it is possible, and not just for an individual person, but for a family, and in a way that might seem Spartan, but, he lives a lot like us. He lives a lot like, those of us in Santa Barbara. He lives just, a little over 100 miles south of us here in California. It's a pretty normal American life, except that he has, carbon emissions that are a tenth of everyone else on average. So I think it's encouraging, because it shows that the people can really do this. Tomorrow, another great documentary, is good because it shows that people are, in fact, doing this all over the planet in different ways. And I think, as a number of people have noted here, that was very heartening to think about, that it is, in fact, a movement. And we'll talk about that, how much it is a movement and all. Okay, so let's jump into comments, and there was a number of comments that, right off the bat, I'm going to give you two or three that broach an issue that someone did, and let me jump right into this one and show you what I'm thinking about here. Oops, here we go. After watching the documentary, I was fascinated how Peter Kalmus reduced his emissions by more than a factor of 10, yet still kept an average lifestyle. I think that is the big takeaway here. It's why I put it at the beginning. If you remember nothing else about Peter Kalmus, if you remember nothing about the details of it, just know that it has been done, that people have done it. It's proven that you can do it, that we can actually beat this thing, that we could all live lifestyles. And by that, I mean, I don't know how else to put it, we're kind of super emitters here in the United States. I mean, we lead the world in emissions. And we really do, by the way, and I've addressed this before. Yes, as a country, China leads the U.S. now. But if you back out of the fact that China's population is so much larger than ours, and if you back out that China is doing so much manufacturing, or so much more manufacturing than we are, the per capita emissions of people in the U.S. is much higher, more than twice as high as people in China. So we are, international leaders in emissions. But just know that, you can live a variation, arguably, and people are going to argue that in the comments, a better, version of the American dream, variation on it, but a better one. By having small emissions. But let's jump into the next comment. I really got irritated by Peter's description of himself, just an old, Joe Schmo who cut his emissions because he made a concerted effort to do so, just like how anyone can. Old middle-class Petey is a scientist for NASA who went to college at Harvard. Most people are not Harvard-educated NASA scientists. Most people are poor. There's something about this guy's self-aggrandizing aura that's deeply concerning. I think it's because he found a way to make himself the hero of the climate movement for himself. All he talks about is himself, and we watched 3 too many guitar solos to understand that's not by mistake. Maybe if he spent less time making documentaries about his sacrifice and putting vegetable oil in his car, he could see that climate is intersectional, and that has a lot less to do with people not wanting to poop outside and a lot more to do with the structures of capitalism that leave the majority of the population with nothing to think about but surviving. This comment received a couple of comments, and I'm going to just jump to one of those comments to clarify a little something, and that is this one. This person agreed. I too felt that Peter Kalmus completely fabricated a false persona in the film Being the Change. As you stated, this guy is a Harvard grad, jet propulsion scientist, and a simple Google search will reveal that he's worth anywhere between $1 and $5 million. In my mind, it's hard to walk the walk and inspire others to make personal action to mitigate the climate crisis from an elevated socioeconomic status. But let me just address this thing here about $1 to $5 million, because I went ahead and did that simple Google search, and the first one that came up, and there are only two that quote this, and that was buzzlearn.com, which I never heard of, and it notes that Peter Kalmus's net worth or net income is estimated to be $1 to $5 million. He has made such an amount of wealth from his primary career as a physicist. But if you read down further on that page, continue on it, Peter Kalmus is a famous physicist. He was born on July 25th, 1933, and his birthplace is Slovakia. So it's not the same Peter Kalmus. And there is another page that if you do that Google search, and it has Peter's picture on it, but it quotes the same number, and it has some of the other facts wrong, like that he doesn't have children and his marital status is unknown, which would be very obviously known if it was really Peter, because he has a book and a documentary talking all about his partner and family. So not the same Peter. But the first question, the first comment, the one that elicited that, I think is worth pausing on, because I got the frustration of the person who wrote it. But it raises this question, and that is, what are any of us to do? What should we do? In other words, we Americans are the problem, and we need to do something, but what is it, and what is sufficient? And in Peter Kalmus's case, what should he have done? And this person says, I'll just scroll back. I'll just read it here. You don't have to. He should have, done something about, dealing with the structures of capitalism that leave the majority of the population with nothing to think about but surviving. In Peter's case, it's particularly unfair, I guess, to level that one, because for English 22, I mentioned that we actually had Peter Zoom into the class, and we had a Q&A with him and all. But at the time, he was making his way across country by train to speak at a Bernie Sanders rally, along with AOC and a number of other people. And, I think he actually spoke to the whole notion of acquiring lots of money, and why it's, the billionaire class and all is really silly. And he's certainly deeply committed to the sort of ruling in of capitalism that Bernie Sanders would have done, which is as radical as any that is going to be likely, brought about in the U.S. In other words, Bernie Sanders didn't get the Democratic nomination. He was felt to be too radical, but, Peter's, Kalmus is certainly endorsing that particular revamping of capitalism. But let me give you another comment here, and I don't want to stop with that one. I want to continue, but this is another take, and also, with Ever Online, it's there are 1,000 comments in this class. There are a whole range of different things. That comment, I think, is important, and I do want to address it, because it does raise this great question of what should we do. But on the other hand, it was certainly not the opinion of everyone else. In fact, the comment I want to show you now is more everyone else's, the opinion that so many other people had, but it addresses this very issue. So I'm going to give you that sort of counterpoint now. So this person is actually responding to someone else who liked Peter Kalmus as well. I also agree that Peter Kalmus is a perfect example of living a happier life without fossil fuels. His life is in a situation where he's simply making the best out of what he has. In fact, he has the brains and resources to make a lot of money, especially with his Harvard degree. He has the opportunity to drive a nice car, live in a big house, and do all the things that we think will make us happy. Instead, he gave up potentially a lavish lifestyle to live one that involves less things and more happiness, more relationships, mindfulness, peace, and joy. While we are not all scientists, and it's not very realistic nor practical to choose the same kind of lifestyle as Peter, we can all share his optimism. We can practice things like gardening, biking, meditation, do whatever we would like, and still deliver a message louder than words. In other words, personal action delivers the message, which I think is a great way of dovetailing with the last deep dive, which is on communication, that this is a big way, which we've been saying, to communicate, which is through action. Personal action is a motivating example, and it demonstrates to others the importance of the climate crisis without overloading them with a list of facts and leave them. So, yeah. So noteworthy about Peter Kalmus, he is a very bright guy and a very successful guy. And there's no question, well, before he embarked on what he's doing, he was actually working with the team that discovered gravitational waves, which resulted in the 2017 Nobel Prize in Physics. He wouldn't have gotten that Nobel, just to keep it clear. I mean, there were 3 people who shared in that, but he was on that team. And I think it was very exciting work, and he certainly liked it, but he felt an obligation to change careers, in essence, and move towards working on climate science, even though that wasn't his specialty, because he just felt it was that important. And, I have no doubt that what this person, the second person or third person said here is true. He had the brains and resources to make a lot of money. I think that's probably right. In fact, before going to Columbia, where Peter got his PhD, he worked as a writing computer software and all. And I have absolutely no doubt that with his skill set, both, his education, his brains, as this person put it, and his personality and his drive, that if he had wanted to make money instead of doing either the gravitational wave thing or the climate change thing, he could have gone to Silicon Valley, and I'm sure he would, have gazillions of dollars right now. But he didn't. And also, he's not suggesting a message here that, is highly technical, right? He's not saying, this is what we need to do with solar cells and all that. The kind of things he's suggesting are meant to be things that we all can do. He specifically is doing that. So, I've mentioned solar cells and the fact that it's only, $6,000 to put them on, and that's what it was for my house here and all. Peter Kalmus is not even saying that because he's, he knows that a lot of people couldn't afford that. And he's instead doing things that anyone can do. And I'm comparing him to me again. I've talked about my electric bike, and, my electric bike cost $3,000. It was expensive. I mean, compared to a car, it's nothing. The average American spends 3 times that every year for their car. So, if instead of having a car, you buy a bike like this, you'll buy it in 4 months. But, as you saw in the documentary, and I can attest to the fact, because the last time Peter was down here, he took the train and he brought his bike. He has an old bike, just an old bike that he's had for years and years, and he still has, what you've seen in the documentary, is a milk box on that bike strapped on with bungee cords. But the kind of things he's doing are things that anyone can do, and I don't think wealth comes into play. In other words, you could level that objection against Ed Begley Jr., for example, who he interviews in the documentary. And, they go up on his roof and you look at that expanse of solar panels, many, many times more than I have here, and the lavish house that he had and all. Well, sure, if you have millions and millions of dollars like Ed Begley Jr., you can no doubt afford to, do all sorts of amazing techno things to your house and all. But that's not the way Peter Kalmus is going about it. But it does raise the question, what can any of us do? For Americans right now, I think Peter Kalmus is doing about what can be done. And first, remarkably, reducing the climate footprint for himself and his family by a factor of 10, working to be politically active, advocating for people who are suggesting radical but necessary change, like implementing the Green New Deal, which Bernie Sanders and others did. I think those are the sort of things. And then the other thing, so we've talked about this, right? Climate activism by way of individual action. Well, Peter's certainly doing that. Advocating for political change and all. He's doing a lot more than just voting. He's working with politicians to do that. And then activism. And, well, this documentary and the book that he wrote and what he does is activism. So, in other words, he could have stopped by just being a climate scientist for NASA, and that would have been doing a lot of good, right? I mean, that's what James Hansen did, and he's pretty much a hero as far as I'm concerned. But Peter goes further in that he's an active climate activist, and through the things he talked about in the documentary, but just producing the documentary and film. So in the end, I mean, I think this is a great question to ask. What can we all do? And I think, Peter Kalmus is a pretty good answer. I mean, just because you can have a big house and just because you can take a career that makes a lot of money, you don't have to do that. We're going to see coming up, I mentioned, I think, once or twice already in the documentary Happy, about a guy who gave up his life as a successful financial person in London, went to Calcutta to work at a hospital for people who are dying. That's terrific. I mean, that's absolutely terrific. I wouldn't in any way be critical of that, but most people aren't going to do it. Peter Kalmus is sort of pushing the envelope of what Americans could do. And many people have noted here that as admirable as they find him, even Peter Kalmus is a little too extreme. that's fine. You can think that, but I mean, I think he's at least trying, and I think that's he should be applauded for it. That's what I think. But anyhow, let me go ahead. Back to the comment we just had. Peter, the day-to-day routine was really inspiring. He lives in Pasadena, about 20 miles away from my hometown. Seeing him in Pasadena really opened my eyes to how possible it is to live an incredibly climate-conscious lifestyle while still living in a desirable place and having different aspects of the so-called American dream. It was inspiring to see Calma so close to my hometown. It was also a bit disheartening because I realized how little I know about the efforts towards mitigating the climate crisis in my own community. Peter spoke about collecting veggie oil, free fruit stands, and going to community meetings, none of which I even knew about, and they're right in my backyard. Although just to clarify, I think the free fruit stands was actually in Oakland, if I'm not mistaken, but I could be wrong. That's one of the interesting things about Peter. So again, with such a large and diverse class, there's someone who actually lives right near Peter. But it doesn't have to be in the Pasadena area. In other words, all over the world. And I think Damien, the film Tomorrow, drew attention to that. All over the world, people are making these efforts now. All over the world, things are happening. So I just sent an email out to you if you're interested in activism about the EcoVista project. Right here at UCSB, in Ivy in particular, there's this effort that's been going on for a few years now to create Ivy into EcoVista, into a transition town, a sustainable community, and all the aspects of it. So if you didn't look at that email, pop it open and look. Just go to the website, or just go to the EcoVista Instagram feed and look at the pictures there. Or even better, they've just produced a wonderful book. I mean, it's an actual book. I sent it to you. It's free. It's a PDF, which is the whole EcoVista catalog, which is styled on this 1960s thing, the whole Earth catalog. But right here in IV, it's happening. It's happening all over the world. It's happening in Pasadena and all. The key to it is, if you're interested, you have to learn about it. And as this person rightly noted, right in this person's backyard, they didn't know that it was happening, and yet it is. So it's something to think about, because the thing that we've been addressing a lot, the American dream, is this sort of massive thing that we think about when we think about Americans, and I think a lot of the world thinks about when they think about Americans. But there's another America. Always remember, there are lots of different Americas, for better or worse, depending on where you are. But there's this new one that's emerging, and it's not just in America; it's all over the world. So it's pretty exciting, and it's happening here and now. So. Yeah, expensive and congested gas stations get, especially in LA. So I think it would be very convenient to be able to use veggie oil and refuel at your home. The problem is the knowledge to do it. The American educational system needs to do a better job at teaching people life skills so that they can have confidence to try acquiring other skills. I used to live in Mexico, and over there they start teaching kids in middle school about mechanics and electricity, among other useful skills, which I have noticed mostly no one here has, and there's no surprise that most people here just wait for someone else to fix the problem rather than attempting to contribute to the solution, and it's a big problem. I think that if all high school students had to learn about working on cars, we would see more veggie-powered cars. Great general comment. I think we're going to get into another comment with the vegetable oil if we get to it, cars. So let me just jump into what this person said. And again, terrific that, this person can offer a perspective outside of the one that many people have, who are, because most people in the class are, California natives, which is great. But, seeing life from the rest of the world is eye-opening. And it keeps coming back to this thing, education. And I'm glad people keep bringing it up, because it's always big for me, because, I'm an educator. And I absolutely agree with this. I grew up on a farm, and my father was a furniture maker. So I grew up learning what this person broadly calls mechanical things. And in fact, we use the term artisan now to frequently refer to sort of like a broad rubric to anyone who does sort of handwork like that. But an older term, when I grew up, it would have been mechanic. So even though I was a furniture maker, grew up apprenticed as a furniture maker from a very young age to my father, I would have been referred to as a mechanic, referencing mechanical skills. And I absolutely agree that we need to learn those more. And it's one of the essential things that we should be learning, K through 12, I mean, we learn all these things about, basically how to do well on placement exams so that we can get into universities and all. But as a number of people have noted here, the sort of basic skills, and we're actually going to get into people talking about that in a person talking about that in a program to teach kids things like gardening and all. I think it's absolutely important. In the same way that I said last time in the deep dive on communicating the climate crisis, it's absolutely important that K through 12 we teach kids about the climate crisis. They should know the reality about it. They should know about a lot of things. I mean, a lot of social justice issues and all need to be addressed, I think, early on with children. But this person's comment I thought was so good because this is a wrinkle that is a very complicated issue and a very old issue, and you can go back to Aristotle, even the privileging of like intellectual acumen and skills over the work of the hand, and it's a big thing. There's a long history of it, but we tend to privilege sort of intellectual work rather than physical work, and we've celebrated it and we've denigrated the physical. The whole idea of getting your hands dirty and people wanting careers where they didn't have to do that. That's all fine, but again, Peter Kalmus as an example, there are people who who wouldn't have to get their hands dirty at all, and yet are wanting to do it because they want to take on the activity of life in a very physical way. But anyhow, I thought that was a terrific comment. Okay. Let's jump to the next one. So this is about the other film, Tomorrow. I was reminded that there are many good people in the world who want to make a difference. Sometimes I really get discouraged, not only by the damage that we are inflicting on our planet, but also the number of people who are willing to do nothing and watch the world fall apart, or worse yet, continue to actively support the systems that are causing all the harm. It was refreshing to hear people discuss their solutions. I love how the film took us to different places around the world and showed us people who are making real changes in various locations. They did have to fly there to do that, by the way, which a number of people have commented on. Same problem with the Leonardo DiCaprio thing, so noteworthy. One of my favorite little changes was the public gardens they introduced in the UK. Not only did those gardens provide sustainable food, but the fact that they are out in public on busy roads allows space for people to open up in conversations about them. Their public appearance spread awareness. I like this change because it doesn't seem too difficult to do. People in the US seem to be resistant to major changes, but I feel like many would support small changes like the gardens. Yeah, I think that's an absolutely great point. I also liked, the film Tomorrow because it made clear that there are people all over the world doing these things. And they're often, and this was a great example, little things like a community allocating vacant lots and all to become public gardens where people can grow food. That happens in most communities. It's actually here in Santa Barbara. So when I first moved here to Santa Barbara before we purchased this house, I wanted to kind of get my hands dirty again, and I looked into it and quickly found that there are community gardens here in Santa Barbara where you can go and get a small plot of ground, 10 by 10 feet, and can you grow all the food that you need to eat there? No. But you can grow things, and it's actually a great way to focus your attention and energy on the what it takes to make your life possible. And there's also, as this person noted, great because you can actually see food growing there, And there are always people, and it was great, who hang around there, who actually really are into it, and it's terrific because they want to share what they know. And it takes a while to learn how to grow food in any particular place, which is why previous comments people have talked about, like indigenous cultures. One of the reasons they're so important because they understand places so well, and we come in with like a one size fits all Western agriculture, and we haven't really paid attention to the area. And I think if you pay attention to it, it can really be helpful. So I'll give you an example, my own example. When we set up the yard here, which was a basic yard I mentioned where our house is here, and it just had grass before. When we moved here, I ripped all the grass out. And down over there, where you can't see, is the main vegetable garden. But the ground here slopes back. So where I am behind here, it slopes down about 6 feet over the sides of the yard. And I learned that there was sorry, it's a helicopter flying over. I'll let it fly. When sorry, I'm pausing. It sounds like it must be two planes or two helicopters. So when I started researching about how the people here, the Chumash people, had originally farmed, and how the people had farmed in the Southwest, because I knew nothing about this coming from a farm in New Jersey back east, an entirely different climate, I learned that they make something called, traditionally thousands of years here, something called slant beds. And the idea is that when water runs down during a heavy storm, it would normally run down to like the lowest point and then out to a stream to the ocean. They stop the water and they try to hold that water back. And what they're able to do is take advantage of very small rainfall that we have here. But when it happens, they capture it all. So what I did when I built that main vegetable garden there, it's at one of the lowest parts in the garden, and I actually dropped it down into the ground a little and put ground up on the side of it, so that when water all rushes down, there's actually gravel walks in there, and it all soaks into the ground of the vegetable garden. So most of the water in the yard winds up in the vegetable garden, doesn't leave the property, and it soaks into the ground so that the roots of plants, and many even seasonal plants, have roots that go 6 to 8 feet into the ground. So I think all this is absolutely terrific that people are thinking about this, and the things like community gardens and all. They seem like such a minor thing, but it's a wonderful way for people to communicate knowledge, to build community, to reconnect up with things that have been lost, that the original peoples often knew about places. And it's so I agree with this person. It's very encouraging. So sorry, I got on a tangent there. Just get me talking about farming. Look what happens. So I did ask at the beginning, ask in my little video introduction, is this the beginning of a movement? And this person replies, I personally feel like it is. I think that there are more people than before that care about saving our planet. They're finding simple and even creative ways to reduce their carbon footprint. It really doesn't seem that hard to do. We just have to remember it's not about owning more, but about owning less and living a simpler life. Walking or riding a bike to places instead of driving there, growing some of our own food, using electricity, buying less stuff, wasting less food, and switching to a plant-based diet, or at least largely one, are not impossible things to do like older generations make it out to be. As you mentioned, Natalie, so this person's replying to someone else, we need to take personal action to reduce our carbon footprint, and as a generation, we can make the difference. It's very much needed. I thought that was a wonderful way of putting it, and I tried to make that point early on in one of the lectures on climate and generation. That often, and other people have made this comment in terms of the films we watched this week, that older generations, so I can be critical here because I'm a member of the older generation, we tend to be, people tend to get kind of set in their ways over time. I think that's kind of a truism. I don't know of any studies to back that up. I'm sure there might be some, but when you folks look at it, just embarking on life and you haven't made these life decisions and commitments, and by that I mean the kind of house that you're going to have, you may not even have a car, probably don't, you're not set in that way of thinking, right? So if you flash forward a lifetime forward for you folks, if you're not 20 but say 40, suddenly now you've had multiple cars, you've lived in different places, you may own a house at this point. All this has kind of become your life. You know what I mean? There's a line in a song by John Lennon, and that is, life is what happens when you're making plans for the future. So you may, have goals of what you ultimately want life to be, but as you go through life and you get a job and you go from here to there, things gradually happen, and even though you may be making bigger plans on what you want to do. So you are at an interesting, and what I think the big takeaway from this comment is, you are at an interesting juncture in your life, because these things that the person is talking about, riding and, walking or riding a bike to places instead of driving there, growing some of your own food, using electricity, buying less stuff, wasting less food, it may not seem like a particularly big deal to you. I would argue, and this person is arguing, I think for older generations, it would be more of a difficult thing. You're used to driving around and all. It's hard to get out of that habit. And maybe that is a good way to put it, that you may likely have not gotten into bad habits yet. My generation has gotten into bad habits. And at the end of the day, and I think that's the thing about these films this week, it makes clear that it's kind of what it is. It's just bad habits. We assume that this is the way it, has to be done, and we've gotten into the habit of doing that way. Eating beef is something. It's just a habit. That's all. Many of these things are just habits. And, it's hard to get into entirely new habits if you have ones that have, burned in over the decades. It's really hard. But if you don't start on those bad habits to begin with, I think it can, can make a huge difference. And you have to wonder too. So going back to Peter Kalmus, and I think it was very kind of him to share his life with us, and you meet his children. You have to wonder what habits they will carry into adulthood and all. So many of the things, the way people are talking about here about different habits. We're going to get into a couple of those if I stop talking and get to more comments. But if children start in good habits to begin with, then I don't think they ever, have the sort of difficulty of trying to stop eating beef and all. It's something I think for, some kids, it just would never be an issue. But let me get to some other comments here. As I scrolled through these comments, I noticed that many people said the most interesting part of the film was, this is being Peter Kalmus's film, the connection between meditation and the climate crisis. I can't help but agree. Although I first thought, why is this why is this part of the documentary so long? What does it have to do with global warming, and why am I watching it? But now that I think about it, the connection is rather obvious. We have learned in this class about how in the U.S., often the idea of happiness is linked to the American dream, which is linked to consumerism, which drives our carbon footprints through the roof. Meditation, as well as other practices such as religion, lifestyle changes, minimalism, help us detach from the idea that happiness must come from owning more stuff, having a bigger house, driving a nice car, flying to extravagant places. I think it's a wonderful observation on the whole meditation thing, and we're going to get a little more of that, I think, if I get down in those comments. Many people did comment on it, and Peter Kalmus, when we asked him about it when he was at English 22, noted that it's the thing that people ask him about the most or find interesting. And he incidentally thought that the whole Humanure thing, the thing that he composts his own waste, he thought people are all going to want to talk about that. I think he might have actually kind of thrown it out there to be a little, I don't know, controversial or something, but the thing that people find interesting is the meditation thing. And I think for good reasons, as this person rightly noted, is, it's an opportunity to sort of stop and reflect on life. It's more than that, but I think that's a big part of it. And, that was Thoreau's whole project, right? took 2 years out of his life to stop and think about his life. Well, we all can't, have those huge chunks of time, but maybe we can have small chunks of time, 5 minutes a day, maybe 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes in the evening. The big outside commitment would be something like Peter Kalmus, an hour in the morning, an hour in the evening. But to sort of pull back and think what's, important and what's not, and in a deeper sense, if you continue with meditation, to sort of detach from thinking altogether and just be mindful of the world and what's around and what matters and what doesn't. And I think, the idea is if you do that, it doesn't take long before you realize the things that we're told are important, all the consumer things and lifestyle choices and all, aren't really what makes us happy or what is important. The things that the documentary focused on, that Peter Kalmus and his partner have focused on, are things like family and community and relationships and experiences and all. And, meditation, I think, pulls people back into that, or gets people thinking about that. Let's go to the next one. This person noted a number of things. And hold on, I'm drinking my tea. One thing to note here is, as I've noted before, these are sometimes just, parts of comments I'm giving you, but, and it would be in this case. One other thing I took away from the documentary was his motto phrase about the climate issue, the motto, heads, hands, and heart. By the way, many people commented on this. So the previous person noted, if you scroll down through the comments, you see meditation a lot. You see this a lot too. This was really meaningful and impactful for me, and I loved how he put it all together. He explained that the hands symbolize action we can take, such as riding bikes and gardening, to benefit us personally and on a bigger level too. Head symbolizes having the realization that there is a problem and that realizing the impacts of actions on each other. And lastly, heart ties it all together. As he stated, it's when you find meaning in this, where you translate understanding and action into making your life more satisfying. Yeah, I agree. What a beautiful way to put it. This is the approach that we should all take with dealing with this issue. We need to first make an effort to realize and accept that we are facing a large problem. With this, we can begin to do research about it. This is, bringing our head and hands into it, and learn about what actions we can take on a personal level and on a broader level. And as we take action, we need to remember why we are doing it. For example, we need to find meaning in our decisions to stop eating meat. While some of us may love it, that is meat, we need to remember that we are helping not only ourselves by excluding it from our diets, but we are helping the planet. If I took away a lot from this documentary. Heads, hand, and heart is something that I'll definitely be reminded of constantly and hoping to apply in my life. Yeah, interesting idea. And by the way, I note it, but I'll say it again. You will be reading Peter Kalmus next week, so you're probably actually reading him now if or have him to read if you're watching this deep dive. Where you're going to get sent to is his personal website, and now he has the entirety of that book, Being the Change Up. And if you're interested in any of these issues, like the head, hands, heart thing, go there, because there are often individual chapters on these things that talk about it more, and he's made it all free. It is an interesting way to put it, the head, hands, heart thing, and an interesting way to help make it nice and concise and focusable for us, that we can see how it functions and what's required to do, and we can see how it's all sort of unifying. And there is, I think, a tie into the meditation there, in that this is, this is being mindful of life in a way, mindful of our actions and all, in a way that typically, we aren't. So why you would do this is for the betterment of yourself and the planet and all, but also it makes you think more about the way that we live. And a lot of us, we just don't do that. And mindfulness is an effort to make us think more about things and all. But what Peter is suggesting is kind of the same thing, but more in action, I think, which is it's a great way to think about it. So let's go down. This film truly made me rethink the way I live. Seeing such a happy, mentally healthy family living their lives in a very sustainable way was eye-opening for me. The most eye-opening part of the film was just the simple fact that Peter went to Harvard, works for NASA, and has all the brains and probably money in the world to live in a massive mansion with tens of cars, yet lives in a quaint little home in Pasadena with his vegetable mile, a car, and happy little family. I wish I could say I would do the same if I had all the knowledge that he does, but I feel I could never be as extreme as Peter. Peter's lifestyle is obviously unrealistic for the average American this time and place, but it gives us a small idea of what we can improve the world. No, we don't have to all fuel our cars with vegetable oil, but maybe we can try meditating, gardening, biking instead of driving, and other basic principles of sustainable living that Peter practices. This film gave me so many ideas on how to live sustainably. I hope to translate those ideas in my day-to-day life. And this person again notes about meditation. Let me not hit too much at once. I'll first say, I started with this, but this person, also noted it, and it's worth repeating. It is great that this is kind of an average American family. Now, to go to the initial objection that the second comment we had, the person who wasn't happy with Peter, there's no doubt about it. I mean, so first, living in a quaint little house in Pasadena, as this person called it, is that he actually doesn't live in Pasadena, but near there. But nonetheless, very expensive, right? Anyone who owns a house in California and a place like that is very expensive. So could Peter, if we decided to take another direction in his life, one pursuing, all out the American dream, could he be living in a more palatial house? And all? I have no doubt that he could, but he didn't, and he has chosen a more modest way of living. As this person rightly notes, not everyone is going to be able to do this. It may be unrealistic. Certainly things like powering your car with vegetable oil and all, not. But this person also notes the film gave me, so many ideas on how to live sustainably. It's great because, both of the films show us people who actually are doing it. I mean, the whole shooting match, the whole thing, reducing the carbon footprint by a factor of 10. It will not be possible or practical for everyone. There may be issues, and all this is assuming undergirding it all is a certain kind of like ableist thing and all too, right? So if you are what if we're assuming that you could drive a car and you can get around that way. What if you can't get around? What if you need a car to get around? What if you can't get in the bicycle? What if you're in a wheelchair? And how does all that play into it? The calculus all changes with that, and for many people it's going to change, and people have to get to jobs and all. It's difficult, and people don't have the choices. So assuming that many of you are going to have sort of, lack of a better way of putting it, the world spread out before you on a whole range of choices when you graduate, and you can go ahead and you have and this is an agreement with the person who is objecting to Peter. You have the world laid out and before you. You're not like the average people in the U.S. or the planet. I mean, that's just a reality. But then again, this course is for you, and it's for us to think about what we can do in those situations. And there's an awful lot that we can do. And as this person said, watching these films and hopefully the class gives you a lot of thought about what you can do. Will you cut your climate footprint, by a factor of 10? Maybe not. Could you cut it in half? You probably could, depending on where you live. And what I mean by that is you've already seen live in a smaller house, and we'll get into co-housing next week or this week. What you're watching at the film Happy, live in a smaller place. Don't have a car, get around with mass transit or walking or biking, and eliminate beef from your diet. If you do those three things, you may well cut your climate footprint in half. And that's huge. I mean, it's absolutely huge. And it also may sort of set you on a path to going lower and lower over time. But anyhow, great comment. An important part of the film was the meditating segment. I've never associated meditating with the climate crisis, but now I do. Everyone I know who meditates frequently, including Peter, is so happy and content with living in the moment and being okay with their fate. Well, that's a wonderful way, living in the moment, which is what meditation is doing, to sort of freeing you from lots of thoughts about. I mean, we tend to get pulled into the past or the future, right? We think about things that have happened and we dwell on them, or we imagine the future, even if it's something like, buying new things and what our life will be like when we finally get that thing we want. But meditation keeps you in the moment and being okay with where we are, which is, it's a good point. We're on this earth not only for ourselves, but to serve everyone else, as stated in the film, and that truly resonated with me. And it's a great point. The American dream is a very selfish thing. I mean, the fact is, we're here, we're connected with everyone else. Many, many other cultures, most cultures throughout history, have been been fully aware of those connections and all. If I can use my life to improve the earth and to help others, that is the ultimate goal. We are nothing but tiny specks in the universe, but knowing you're making a change in the world is such a content feeling. I've had a fascination and interest in meditating and hope I can start incorporating into my daily routine. I think everyone could use a bit of relaxation and calmness in and out day-to-day, in our day-to-day hectic lives, and receiving stress is certainly not a bad feeling, relieving. So, again, so many people commented on the idea here. But the notion of being mindful and of trying to live in a way that is, good for you and good for the planet and connected with everyone else. If you didn't see the film tomorrow and you get a chance, watch it. I will leave it up, but after the class is over, you'll still have access to Gaucho Space a while, I think, but the instructional development people tend to pull down the videos after a while. So if you want to watch it, I would, or you can always come back and remember it later, and you can, I think you can get it online if you look. I'm not telling you to do anything illegal, but I think you might find it if you looked around. But anyhow, meditation is an interesting thing. UCSB has classes. So I mentioned to the honors section this year that last year, before COVID, it just so happened that they conducted because the honors section was, as I recall, on Friday. They conducted a meditation workshop on Fridays in the same building. So I actually took this section there and all. But there's a ton of information online regarding that if you're at all interested. And by the way, it's been sort of decoupled from the tradition that it comes out of, which is really mainly, I would argue, people don't disagree a little, but I would say Buddhism or Hinduism. Obviously, there's an older tradition there too, and there's lots of different traditions. But modern mindfulness is pretty much coming out of Buddhism, and it's been interpreted by a number of people over the last 4 decades or so, and completely secularized. So if you're concerned that you have to sort of change religions or something, no, it's just a practice that you can do. I mean, think of it like yoga. I mean, you don't have to change religions to do yoga, even though yoga comes out of a religious tradition. But there are books like Full Catastrophe Living by Jon Kabat-Zinn, that's like a classic and all, and anything by Thich Nhat Hanh that explains mindfulness. And I always recommend people, one of my favorite podcasts is 10% Happier with Dan Harris. Probably already mentioned it, which is great if you're interested in mindfulness, which you don't have to be for environmental reasons, but throwing it out there. We have watched in this class. I enjoy the ones that take a positive attitude to the documentaries. This may just be me seeking comfort during turbulent times, but humanity needs hope during crises. So the timing of this could not have been better. Tomorrow, it gave me hard facts, but also gave me hope for our planet and our humanity and future. Instead of taking the doom and gloom approach and showing the seemingly irreversible devastation created by climate change, tomorrow shows people from all walks of life suggesting strategies and taking positive actions. power does indeed corrupt. This is why the government is viewed as untrustworthy by most Americans. As the documentary states, it would be wonderful if the powers that be had humanity change their ways, but wealth and power will corrupt anyone. Thus, I was really intrigued by the documentary suggestion that local power, local economies, and local businesses are about. Most documentaries focus on, this is such a good comment, I think I'll end on it. But I'm going to read the whole thing. Most documentaries focus on important problems, allowing the audience to re-examine their ways to provide solutions. But Tomorrow gives its viewers choices about their future instead of frightening them into change. Of all the films we've watched in this class, this one has instilled the desire to change in me the most. I would definitely try to stop eating red meat after watching it. It is a good documentary, and what's worth noting about it, there are a number of things, and this person hits on a lot of them. I talk about the need for political change, the need to vote at a minimum, or if you can do more, great. But it's also the fact that you can come about this from a grassroots way. You can do it personally. We saw Peter Kalmus and his family, but then, Peter, introduced us to friends of his who we're doing things, and in Tomorrow you see a whole range of people, and these are local grassroots efforts, and that's what makes them so exciting. So in other words, it'd be great if we passed the New Deal. I think we absolutely have to, but that would be top down, right? That's the federal government working there. Grassroots is little things where people do things like clear out a vacant lot and start a community garden, that sort of thing. The EcoVista project is all grassroots effort for the most part. And I think that's very exciting. And this person rightly notes that, I started the class with the sort of doom and gloom because I wanted you to know, the reality of it, because there's so much disinformation out there and people will say it's really not that bad, but I wanted you to know what it was. But I agree, that's not, it's necessary, but it's not very heartening and it's not very helpful. That's why I noticed that, even though Al Gore's film An Inconvenient Truth was such a milestone in communicating the climate crisis, it was just a real downer because it just really didn't suggest anything. There are so many things that are being done now. Peter Kalmus was great to look at because you can see a single family doing something. It's also the case with Damien that you can see all over the world are things being done, but that's just what was put together, that little montage in that documentary. If you look around, all over, little things are happening, and you can be involved in all of them. So it's not just that you could, garden in your own yard or ride your bike around and all. There are many ways of connecting up with people who are doing things. And I keep going back to it, but it's useful to note. EcoVista is that. It's people trying to do something, and it's just one of many, many, many things. EcoVista is actually, we can call it what it is, a transition town, because it is. Because transition towns are a thing. Transitioning, and actually, if the email I sent out where I noted EcoVista, I sent you to the Wikipedia article on transition towns. We don't really have time for me to go over them now, but just put in your browser transition town wiki, and you'll get there to see what it's about. It's a recognizable thing. It has a name now because it's happening all over the U.S. and all, and that's what's so encouraging. And not always, but for the most part, it is being fueled by a younger generation. So, you can think about like revolutions being these incredible political, dangerous, military thing. And I guess sometimes they are, but revolutions can be, well, they indeed are, but revolutions can be simpler. I mean, a revolution is taking place across the planet right now with respect to the climate crisis. And it's designed to make the world a better, more equitable place. And if you research what people are thinking about with EcoVista and what EcoVista is about, it is all about that. It is as much a social justice issue as it is an environmental one. And it's just so heartening. And as this person rightly notes, you hear so much doom and gloom about the climate crisis, but, this film, the film Tomorrow, was really uplifting in that way, as well as it should be. And I mean, I think if we're, the real solution now is to look to the future we want to build, and to build it. And there are people doing that. It's not like we have to, figure it all out ourselves. People all over the planet are desperately trying to figuring out how to do it and working together. And I don't want to say having fun during it, but doing it, but it is true. They are, in that they're the kind of life they're living is in many ways being improved by the actions of improving life itself for everyone. So just something to think about. Hopefully the documentaries, made clear that, it is possible to do what we need to do, that people are doing it, that you can do it. And one example is something like Ego Vista, that you can actually do it right here. And as you leave, UCSB, I'm sure, depending on where you go, there'll be plenty of things that you can do there too. And if not, well, hey, it's, maybe you have to go there and start them. Okay, so that's it. And you will be reading this week Peter Kalmus in greater detail. So you'll be finding out more about what he's saying in greater detail, including we'll be looking at like fossil fuels and how we need to sort of pull ourselves away from them with things like carbon, putting a price on carbon. But anyhow, we'll get to that next week. Okay, take care and have a great week.